record on this computer. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. It's good to be with you all today as we work our way through the story of Jacob and Esau. I'm not sure how far we'll get. Last 2 weeks ago, we ended early before I expected. It's the first time that happened. I don't know if that'll happen again today, but if it does, I'll push past. I just might not have exact PowerPoint slides for you yet, but I have my notes for the whole course here that I can work through. So it's good to be with you all. Oh, look at this. Watch this. I can apparently turn on subtitles. Carolyn, do you want me to turn on the subtitles?
No.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, the fountain of all wisdom, you know our necessities before we ask and our ignorance in asking. Have compassion on our weakness and mercifully give us those things which for our unworthiness we dare not, and for our blindness we cannot ask. Through the worthiness of your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever.
Amen. Amen.
Of course, that is the collect for today that you heard in the liturgy, if you were a participant in that. And even though the collects, one of the oddities of the prayer book right now is our collects were written when the lessons were on a one-year cycle. And so they were written to kind of collect the lessons of the day into kind of a thematic sort of a collect. And you may notice that some Sundays you hear the collect and then you hear the lessons and you think those have nothing to do with each other, because they don't anymore. The Lutherans actually have done this better. They've created a 3-year cycle of collects that actually do line up with the readings chosen. So that said, I think this particular collect lines up very well with the Old Testament reading for today that I preached on, the story of Jacob and his ladder, this whole sense of God having compassion on our weakness and giving us things which we are unworthy to actually receive. That emphasis on the kind of the unsurpassed mercy of God, which is so very, very present in all of Scripture, but I also find particularly present in the Jacob and Esau story. So as a reminder, if you're new to the class, these are the texts I'm working with. This is the New Oxford Annotated Bible with Apocrypha and the How to Read the Bible book by book, great opening entree into the stuff we're doing. We'll do a little review since it has been a couple weeks. If you remember, as well as you know your family history, you need to know that of the patriarchs. So here you have the family of Abraham. In form, you can see they're all marrying one another. We talked about that a little bit a couple of weeks ago. That's uncomfortable. We've talked about how Sarah, Abram claims that Sarah is his half sister, and we don't know if she actually is his half sister, if that's another lie. That's why there's a little dot and a question mark there. And then you can see who's marrying who, and you can see, and this becomes important as you follow, that not only do we see in the story of Isaac the return to Haran so that Isaac can marry Laban, who is Laban's sister Rebekah. But then you see when Isaac's sons, Jacob and Esau, when Jacob gets married, he goes back to Haran and marries Leah and Zilpah, Leah and Rachel, and then their handmaids Zilpah and Bilhah. So there's this constant back and forth occurring as we go from the promised land back to Haran, and also this common connection between Nahor's lineage from Nahor, Bethuel to Laban, and Abram's lineage from Abram, Isaac to Jacob. So, and then if you go farther out, you know that Lot played an important role in the Abram story. And remember, Lot, right, was Abram's nephew. So he was the son of Haran. So all three of the sons of Terah, even though, you know, if I probably asked you before this class who's Terah, who knows, maybe if I asked you at the beginning of this class who Terah was, you would have no idea who I'm talking about. But Terah is Abram's dad. But all three of those sons, their lineages play a very interesting role in the story. Haran's lineage producing Lot, but then we get, remember, the incestuous relationship between his daughters and Lot, which creates the Moabites and the Ammonites, which is why we hate the Moabites and the Ammonites, because they're clearly horrible. From Nahor's lineage, we get the Bethuel, then Laban line, and then from Abram's lineage, we get the patriarchal line. Does that make sense? I hope that graph is helpful, because the fact that this is all one big family story is so important. I mean, I think that we tend to think that, you know, particularly with all of the emphasis on family values, or biblical values. I always found those phrases, family values in the Bible, to be very interesting, because family values in the Bible are pretty screwed up a lot of the time. You can see just looking at Tara. This is a messy. So if you feel like your family's a little messy, like, it's fine. You got ways to go before you approach the messiness of poor Tara, who I'm sure just spends his entire eternity rolling in his grave over what his kids do. Any questions, comments, things you notice in that? Okay, we'll push on. Also remember, oh, go ahead. Does anybody have a question? No? Okay. Also remember, you got to know who the 4 patriarchs are. Who is the first patriarch? Go ahead and unmute yourself and shout it out. Who's the first patriarch?
Abraham.
There you go. Who's the second one?
Isaac.
Then?
Jacob.
And then?
Joseph.
Nicely done, Joseph. Excellent. That's right. We get Joseph, who's one of the 12 sons of Israel. So, it is kind of funny. I didn't intend, when I put this class together, for the class to be aligning with the lectionary readings, but it's been kind of hilarious that it has been. So between my preaching on Sunday, Intro to the Old Testament, and the lectionary Bible study, like, those that are doing all three are stewing. And they're all going to diverge in a couple of weeks here, so don't worry about that. It's been very fun for me. From a preaching standpoint, it's helpful, because that means I'm really digging into these texts as I prepare for each one of those 3 things. So if you have a Bible handy, go ahead and pull it out. As I used to say in the church I went to when I was growing up with my dad and Val, wave it around, make the devil angry. Right, Val? There you go. Chapter 25, we'll go to verse 19, and I just want to do the birth of these 2 sons. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is to be this way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her time to give birth was at hand, there were 2 twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So a few things to note as we're telling this story, because there's a lot going on. We talked a couple weeks ago about how amazing it is that Isaac and Rebekah's story has so many parallels to the story of Abraham and Sarah, except that what takes chapters for Abraham and Sarah is compressed. Remember, that moment of marriage and birth was 20 years. He was 40 years old when he got married, 60 years old when he had his kids. So that was still this, like, it's just a massive, painful experience of being barren for 20 years, waiting till you're 60 years old to have kids. But the narrator doesn't want to go through all that again. So it's oddly enough just is echoing the story, but compressing it down, not kind of getting into the nitty gritty of it, because the narrator wants so much to get to the birth of these 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. And we see there's immediate insight into the character of each of these men. Esau is described as a man of the field, a skilled hunter. He's hairy. Esau is like a man's man. Esau is the kind of guy that, you know, beat me up in school. Like, I could never pull this off. You know, when I tried hunting, it's me trying to be Esau. When I did that back before I had kids, I could get out into the field. So Esau is this, like, tough, strong, skilled hunter person. Jacob is more of a man of the kitchen. That's what he lives in the tent. So he's his mom's favorite, bit of a mama's boy. He's a peaceful man. In the ancient culture, Jacob is clearly being slurred here, right? Because if you think in an ancient culture, what's the more helpful man to have around? The one who hangs out in the tent with his mom and cooks, or the one who can go out and produce game and be strong and protect the family? So a lot of what's going on here, this is this constant theme in scripture, that God chooses the little people over and over again. So not just is Jacob the younger brother, but Jacob's not very tough. He's not very aggressive. And so what he's done is he's learned to make up for what he lacks in strength. He has in his head. To me, Jacob reminds me a lot of the character of the imp in Game of Thrones, right? Tyrion Lannister, who is like this tiny guy, but he outsmarts everyone in the entire series, even to the very end of the series, because he's had to learn to use his mind. And so there's this kind of very strong comparison being drawn, which is trying to very much sort of slur Jacob and make him kind of like not helpful. Also, can you think of a previous story that had a tension between someone who's a hunter and someone who's kind of this gentle gathering person? Where did we hear that before?
Cain and Abel.
Right? This is a really interesting echo of the Cain and Abel story. And what's so fascinating is for the Hebrew Bible, that is kind of a violent text at times, in these kind of primordial patriarchal stories, the aggressive hunter is not the one that God chooses. But God chooses this kind of gentler, not as assertive person is the one who is deemed as more faithful. I don't know what all is going on there, but it is an interesting echo, I think, drawing us to that Cain and Abel story. Absolutely. And then we get the sale of the birthright, which happens in chapter 25, beginning in verse 29. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore, he was called Edom, because that's a kind of play on the word red. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew.
We're taking a class online right now.
I'm going to real quick mute Catherine.
Okay.
Ooh, if I could get to her. There we go. Now she's muted. So Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus he despised his birthright. Why is it that Jacob is the preferred character in this narrative? This is going to be an interesting question every time we move through this story. So he's the younger, he's not as strong, not as aggressive, and yet he seems to be preferred in some ways. In this text here, he's kind of tricky. So the birthright, what that refers to, these are the extra rights that would always go to the eldest son, which would be primarily leadership in the family and a double share of the inheritance. So you don't split everything in half. You get the eldest gets twice as much. So you kind of, if you think of if it's two sons, if it's Jacob and Esau, Jacob would get 1/3, Esau would get 2/3. You get two to one parts is kind of how it gets. So you get the larger inheritance, you get that. So Esau comes in, he's starving, he's hungry, and Jacob says, "Sure, I'll give you some food if you give me your," which is kind of a mean thing to say if your brother's starving, like, right? This I don't think is meant to be. You always have to be careful. We have a tendency to read these texts, and I would always ask, is the behavior we're reading being praised or being criticized, right? And this is always, you can't always assume that because you're reading something happening that what this person is doing is of God. And this is a great example of an instance where something's going on here that does not seem to be of God. This is not caring for your family. And Esau is also kind of being caricatured here, because you got to think, like, what kind of a person is going to sell their birthright for a pot of stew? What they're trying to do is characterizing him as a dull person who's outwitted by Jacob on an empty stomach. And what all of this is, in actuality, is very likely an origin story for the Edomites. So in the same way that we know why the Moabites and the Ammonites are horrible, because they're children of incest. man, those Edomites, you know what their ancestor did? He sold his birthright for a pot of stew, bunch of idiots. So so the kind of the slurring of Esau in this text is different than the slurring of Jacob. It's to kind of, it's an origin story explaining why we think those Edomites are such horrible, horrible people. And then after this, we're not going to tell the story, but after this is when we get the story of Isaac and Abimelech, where Isaac repeats. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. There's this odd interlude in chapter 26 where Isaac also pretends his wife Rebekah is his sister. But we talked about that, and then we talked about the rest of Isaac's story a couple weeks ago. So what I want to go to now is chapter 27, because this is what is interesting. So was the birthright stolen with the pot of stew narrative, or was it stolen through the trickery in chapter 27? That's a really interesting question, because if it was already Jacob's by right because of the pot of stew, why did Jacob have to go through all of this rigmarole with his mother in chapter 27? So what's most likely going on is that there were two narratives that were told about why it is that Jacob, the younger one, had the birthright, and the Esau, the father of the Edomites, wound up being the rejected one. And then what the narrator did, or the compiler of the book of Genesis, the Tanakh, the Torah, is he took both of those narratives and kind of stitched them together, leaving them both there. So that's because it is a little odd, right? That there's two completely different explanations given for how this trickery happened. But in both of them, you get the trickery that there's through deceit that this happens. And so when you go to this, we'll start actually in chapter 26. When Esau was 40, he married Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite, in Basmath, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. Remember when Isaac didn't have a wife yet, and his dad was like, Abram was like, don't have a wife from the foreigners of this land. You got to go back to Haran and get a wife from our family. So Esau is not doing that. Esau is marrying the women of the land. And this is going to be important later on when you see what happens with Jacob. He's marrying the women of the land, these Hittite women, and there's some family tension going on because of that. But there's also this theme, and there's this question constantly throughout Scripture of this marrying of foreign wives. What happens when a person of Israel marries a foreign wife? And often that is given as a reason for why sin took place, that the foreign wives kind of led the husband astray, because, you know, men don't have brains to think critically for themselves, apparently. And so you're seeing a theme here, which you will see later on in the text of the Old Testament, but you're already seeing it echoed in the Esau story. Then we get to chapter 27. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so he could not see, he called his elder son Esau and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "See, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out in the field and hunt game for me. Then prepare me savory food, such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah, who was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat, that I may bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my word as I command you. Go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids, so that I may prepare from them savory food for your father, such as he likes, and you shall take it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies." But Jacob said to his mother, "Look," or maybe more accurately, "Look, look, my brother Esau," right? He's a wimpy kid. "Look, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a man of smooth skin. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse on myself and not a blessing." His mother said, "Let your curse be on me, my son, only obey my word and go get them for me." So he went and got them, brought them to his mother. His mother prepared savory food, such as his father loved. And Rebekah took the best garments of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house. She put them on her younger son Jacob. She put the skins of the kids on his hand and the smooth part of his neck. Then she handed the savory food and the bread she'd prepared to her son Jacob. So he went in to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, I'm Esau. I'm Esau. Esau, your firstborn, I've done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game so that you may bless me. But Isaac said to him, how is it you found it so quickly, my son? He answered, because the Lord your God granted me success. This is blasphemy. This is not just trickery. This is blasphemy to use God in this. Because the Lord your God granted me success. And Isaac said, come near that I may feel you to know whether you're really my son Esau or not, for your voice is wimpy. No, wait, that's not in there. So Jacob went up to his father Isaac, who felt him and said, well, the voice is Jacob's voice. Told you. But the hands are hairy like his brother Esau's hands. And so he blessed him. He said, are you really my son Esau? He answered, I am. Then he said, bring it to me so I may eat my son's game and bless you. So he brought it to him and he ate, and he brought him wine and he drank. And his father Isaac said to him, come near and kiss me, my son. So he came near and kissed him and smelled the smell of his garments. Yeah, they smell stinky like Esau. Esau never used deodorant. And he blessed him, saying, the smell of my son is the smell of a field the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. And as soon as Isaac finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of his father Isaac, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He also prepared savory food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, let my father sit up and eat of his son's game so you may bless me. His father said, who are you? He answered, I'm your firstborn. I'm your firstborn son, Esau. And Isaac trembled violently and said, who is it that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it all before you came, and I blessed him. Yes, and blessed he shall be. And when Esau heard his father's words, he cried out an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me also, father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully. He's taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and look now, he has taken away my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Isaac answered Esau, I've already made him your lord. I've given him all his brothers as servants, and with grain and wine I've sustained him. What can I do for you, my son? Esau said to his father, you have only one blessing, father. Bless me also, father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And his father Isaac answered him, see, away from the fatness of the earth shall your home be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. So what's fascinating here is earlier in the narrative, when you're doing the experience of infertility and the barrenness and then the gift of a child over this course of 20 years, the narrator takes like 4 verses to tell that story. But when you get to this second supplanting, first one of the birthright, now of the blessing, the second supplanting, the second trickery, the narrative is telling, this is a beautifully told story. This is good prose. This is not just trying to get past the text. The narrator, and whenever this happens in the Bible, when you notice that that you're kind of going at a clip, and then all of a sudden it's like the train comes to a screeching halt, that's usually a sign that the narrator really wants you to slow down, because this is an important story that you're working through. And that's what we see here. This is an important story we're working through as we talk about the blessing going to Jacob instead of to Esau. So what's important to note is that deathbed blessings, which is what this is the blessing you give before you die, and curses, that these were essential in the life and literature of ancient people. They believed that a deathbed blessing or a deathbed curse actually released irrevocably a tangible power. And so that's one second, I'm just going to adjust my mat. Whoa. I like to stay on a little soft mat. It's got moved as I've been moving. So this is a big part of the ancient world. You and I probably read this. We're like, well, what? Can't he just say something nice to Esau? This idea that Isaac is somehow bound by it. And so part of it is that ancient world. Part of it as well is, remember how Isaac is portrayed throughout this narrative. Isaac is a passive character, right? And even in the face of this trickery, he can't muster a blessing. Just because he gave the firstborn's blessing to Jacob doesn't mean he can't bless Esau. Because if you think about it, if that was what his blessing meant, then his intention had been for Jacob to live a horrible life, right? So this is absolutely a story of, Jacob tricking Esau out of the blessing, but it's also a story of a massively dysfunctional family where the father loves one, the mother loves another, and that cross pain in the relationship. Yeah, it's great that Jacob's mom loves him, but women can't give you a blessing. Women can't give you the property. Women can't give you an inheritance in that culture. And so what you see is Rebecca, she seems to be kind of like conniving and spying, but and that's true. But in another way, you see that she's trying to look out for her son Jacob. And if Isaac had not decided to deliver blessings in such a tremendously lopsided manner, maybe Esau wouldn't have been as screwed as he was. So it's a very, very interesting text with a very interesting turnaround with that. This story also resembles ancient trickster traditions. This is actually a literary genre in ancient cultures where there's a trickster where a cultural hero flourishes through these underhanded acts. And these occur actually throughout ancient literature and also up into Greco-Roman and even medieval literature. And Jacob is kind of the stereotypical trickster who winds up being able to succeed by being really, really sneaky. So there's a literary illusion being drawn here. And that's kind of the genre that they're drawing upon. So I'll go ahead and pause right now. Are there any questions, comments? I just covered a lot of ground. It's that interesting. Great. Awesome. We'll keep going. All right. So we'll press on. Jacob's ladder. I'm not going to read the story again because it was a text for today, and you heard it already. But I do want to just take a moment to spend a little time talking about this question of the Salam. This is the Hebrew word that's translated as ladder in the NRSV. And one of the reasons it's translated as ladder is because when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, the Greek word used was klamaxis, which is the Greek word for ladder. And so that's why, so in the Septuagint, translated the Sulam as ladder. That's why in the English, when they did the translation, they translated it similarly as ladder. Even though, like I said, this is a hapax legomena, which is a word only occurs once in the text of the Bible, a sulam. So what could the sulam be? Well, it could be a ladder. I mean, we don't know it is. We can't not think it's not a ladder. So this is the statue I told you about in my sermon. This is Jacob's dream. And I think it's sometimes Christian art's just kind of weird and creepy, and sometimes it really does capture beauty. And I still adore this sculpture. I love the way that the rungs seem to be. I talked in my sermon, the rungs seem to be suspended in midair, which is a trick of the sculpture, right? That you can't tell that they're not. And you see the angels ascending. That's a 40-foot high sculpture. Those angels are 8 feet tall. So you could imagine standing underneath of it. It's a really kind of powerful image. And you see the rock set up all around it, which is kind of an allusion to the rock that Jacob, right, slept on, and then he later poured oil on and anointed when he designated the shrine at Bethel. So it could be a ladder. It could be a ladder descending and going down from heaven. Or it could be a staircase. Perhaps like the one on the Ziggurat. And so here is actually the Ziggurat in that still exists. This is a picture of that Ziggurat, the ruins of the great Ziggurat at and so you could imagine, he gets a vision of something like this that appears with angels going up and down the staircase into heaven, because of course the way you get to the divine is at the top of the Ziggurat, right? And then with God standing at the top of it speaking to him. So this is another option for what he could have seen as the Sulam, because the Hebrew word, the Akkadian word for staircase is silamit, which is very similar to solam. And so there's an idea that maybe that's what the Sulam was, is that it was a staircase, kind of like the one on a Ziggurat, which of course would be an echo of another story, right? We've already done this story too. When else did we talk about the ziggurats in Babel. Tower of Babel, right? The Babylonian. So this is very fascinating. So another reading of this, and this fits with kind of trying to take a literary approach to the text, is that Jacob's dream is of a divine ziggurat that is the fulfillment of what the ziggurat of Babel had tried to be. In Babel, the people were building their own tower, their own ziggurat into heaven, as to prove how powerful and mighty they were, and God demolished it. But that's not to say God's not connected with heaven and earth. And so it could be that Jacob's eyes are open and he gets an opportunity to see the actual divine ziggurat upon which God sends his messengers up and down. And there's also some interesting debates about this. So one idea is that where this is, pretty close to the boundaries of the promised land. And so one of the ideas was that this was the place at which, if you were passing it, the angels of this nation would go up to heaven, and the angels from another nation would come down to accompany you. That's one of the rabbinic interpretations of this text in terms of what's going on with these angels going up and down from heaven. There's a lot of ideas about what that might be, but like I said, we don't really know. And I've got a screenshot here of a journal article I was reading as I worked on my sermon, that just so you can see some of the Hebrew here. So he sleeps and dreams of Salam, and then that's the Hebrew word for Salam. Those look like the same letters. Remember, you read Hebrew backwards, but that's actually an SLM. That S and that M at the front and the back are actually two different letters if you look at the curvature of it. I love learning Hebrew. That's not true. Until this century, it was generally accepted that he dreamed either of a ladder or an object resembling a Babylonian ziggurat tower. Early interpreters noticed, however, the existence of other words that mean ladder or staircase. Ma'alah in Exodus, 1 Kings, and Nehemiah, which is ladder or staircase. Ascent to a city gate or highway, which is Mashlah, Numbers, 1 Samuel, or tower, Migdal, and that's used, of course. The Tower of Babel is described as a Migdal. So those that would say that this is not an echo of Babel would say, why does he see a Sulam instead of a Migdal? He should see a Migdal, because that's what Babel was, a Migdal, a tower. And so they were perplexed as to why the author of Genesis had chosen to use the word Sulam. And there's still just tremendous disagreement today about what that structure actually was. But as I said in my sermon, the point is not so much what the structure was, what it looked like, but is how the structure functioned. And as Jacob describes it, he says, this is the gate of heaven. This is the place at which heaven and earth are able to connect, and God comes into it. And so there's actually another theory. I think actually this author might have made this argument. I don't have a picture of this, but that what's being perceived is in the Sulam is not a tower or a staircase, but is literally a gate set above him in the sky that is like a portal into heaven. That's what he sees. It's not about the structure that the angels are going down on, because the difficulty as well is the Hebrew word here. It says that there were angels ascending and descending upon it. That's actually not the normal way that preposition, which is bit, that preposition is generally translated as in or through it. So the angels were ascending and descending in it or through it would be the normal way that preposition would be translated. It can be translated as upon as well, because Hebrew is just weird. It's Hebrew. But it is possible that what the text is actually is he saw a gate set in the heaven with the angels of God ascending and descending through the gate. And so he stopped as, this is the gate of heaven. This is the place that I've seen. Another possibility, I don't have a picture of this one either, but another possibility is that this is drawing into an ancient temple structures, where what you would do in a temple is you would have kind of the entrance, and then there'd be a curtain, and you go from that into a holier place, and then into another holier place. So the ladder is not vertical, but it's horizontal. And you can think of the way that this winds up being played out in the Holy of Holies, in the way the temple is described, right? The temple is built, there's the outer court of the Gentile, the inner court of the Israelites, and then there's the holy place in that, and then inside the Holy of Holies is in that. So it's this concentric movement in and through. And so the other possibility is that it's not that we're being too literal thinking about heaven being the sky, but that this is the ancient place through which you go through the successively holier places until you enter into heaven itself. And it's not actually a hole in the sky, but it's, you know, kind of a dimensional portal, if you want to use sci-fi language. That's another possibility, because those structures existed and people believed those were gates into heaven itself. Those were not just gates into holy consecrated place, but they could be gates actually into the realm of the divine, where you could be in the presence of the divine itself. So that's another possibility when we think of this Salam, this gate image. And we just don't really know what the answer is. Questions?
Further up and further in.
Further, right? This is what C.S. Lewis would say in The Last Battle: further up and further in.
Yeah, and they go through what? The portal is the hut that opens up, and they're in going up and over into the real Narnia.
Right. Which, of course, what Lewis is doing there is drawing deeply upon Platonic imagery of the way reality functions. There's kind of reality, but reality we experience is only an echo or a reflection of actual reality, which is harder and more real, and that can go progressively true until you reach God itself, from which all reality emanates. I've
been thinking now, now we see through Zoom, but
right.
Zoom face to face.
Well, and that's why I think it's so important is a lot of the times our reading of texts in the Old Testament is very heavily influenced by medieval art and not by the text itself and what ancient cultures believed and how they actually functioned. And that's why I find the literary approach is helpful, but that's what, to me, the historical critical information becomes very interesting to see. So instead of just only staying in the text, trying to figure out, so like, what did other cultures do? How did they experience the gate of heaven? What did it look like? Did it resemble anything that this could be? And that's what Jacob is seeing here. And as I mentioned in my sermon, this is a turning point in the narrative, because if you notice, when Isaac asked Jacob about why he'd been so successful, Jacob does not say, "Oh, it's because God helped me." Right? Do you remember what he actually said to Isaac?
Your God?
Your God, not my God. Your God helped me, Dad. So Isaac has not yet fully taken on Isaac's God as his own God. And so in this moment when Jacob encounters God in Genesis 28, and God says to him, dropped it. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac, and the land on which you lie, I will give to you. And then you skip to the end of it. No, I am with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what was promised for you. And so I said in my sermon how, Jacob says, "Oh, this is surely the Lord is in this place and I did not know it." The other way of translating that would be, surely the Lord is in this place and I did not know him. This is when Jacob has his first experience with God, and his dad's God becomes his God, in an unexpected way. And the power that this God meets him when he's done something pretty horrible to his family, or if you want to interpret it the other way, when he's escaped a massively dysfunctional family where his father was basically going to disown him and give everything to Esau, and he managed to squeal some of it away for himself by being clever. Whatever way you see it, he's in a bad spot, whether it's through his own sin or whether it's through escaping a massively dysfunctional family. Who depends on how you want to shade the text. But either way, that this God comes to him. And like I said as well in the sermon, this is the first time in the whole story Jacob's been alone. There's always been someone with him in every story told, except for this is the first time when it's just him. And he, and it's meant to be, he takes a rock and pulls it up. This is what's the hymn? Da, 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 da. Come thou fount of every blessing. This is the great line that unfortunately some modern hymnals have changed, where one of the verses is originally, "Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come." And that word Ebenezer is stone of help, and that is an ancient understanding of the stone upon which Jacob rested his head.
The Lutherans still raise their Ebenezer.
Good
Well,
for them.
that Ebenezers need to be raised.
An insight I remember reading a long time ago is that this story is a weaving together of the J and E traditions, because there is the separation between earth and heaven. God is up in heaven, and God speaks from heaven. But it's the Lord who is in this place, and it's the Lord who stands beside Jacob.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, that it's Elohim is above the heaven, but Yahweh is right here next to him. And you can see in the ancient people they're still trying to figure out how it is God functions in the world we live in. And so they have all these stories that have been told for centuries, handed down and handed down. And when they're trying to put these stories together into one text, it's challenging because they don't always see God acting the same way, right?
But the tip-off is that the word God is used sometimes as the remote one, but it's the Lord who is the imminent one.
Yeah.
He stands beside Jacob.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Now there's two different contradictory stories of why Jacob is going, because they stick in the repeat of Abraham getting a wife for Isaac.
Yes, yeah, let's go ahead and let's go. Thank you for I wanted to draw attention to that as well. Thank you. So yeah, so when he's running away, is he running away because he's afraid he's going to be killed by Esau, or is it because what you saw earlier in this chapter, in chapter 28, the beginning, Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, you shall not marry one of the Canaanite women, right? We don't marry Canaanite women. Instead, go to Padan Aram, the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take his wife there, one of the daughters of Laban. So take one of the wife of one of your mother, of your uncle, take one of your cousins, basically, go marry one of your cousins. Because this is not the Holy Land, this is Kentucky. And may God be fruitful and bless you and blah, blah, blah. And as well, may he give you the blessing of Abraham to you and your offspring so that you may take possession of the land where you now live as an alien. So remember, there's still aliens in this land. They don't yet possess this land. And so he goes away to do that. And then it says, now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to have a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he charged him, and that Jacob obeyed. When Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please his father, he went to Ishmael and took Mahalath, daughter of Abraham's son Ishmael, the sister of Nabaoth, and to be his wife in addition to the wives he had. So like, Esau is like trying to make this work. Like he first marries a Hittite wife, which is absolutely going to piss your family off because, you know, this is like shades of West Side Story, right? Stick to your own kind, stick to your own kind, right? It's kind of going on here. And so he's like, he can see that, Isaac's going to go, well, I'll marry someone in the family. And he marries a kid of Ishmael. Yeah, not that part of the family, Esau. Come on, man. Like, that's the wrong part of the family. Esau just can't get it straight. This is why those Edomites are a bunch of idiots. We've never liked the Edomites. They're all the descendants of Esau. He couldn't get anything right.
But it's still family, you know, that you
It's
don't
still
get
family.
along, but it's still family. And, you know, it's Abraham's second wife, or however you count it, that has a bunch of kids, and he sends them off. One of them is Midian.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's when Moses flees from the murder rap. He's going to family.
Yeah.
Distant by then, but.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about Bethel. So this story as well is an origin story for the shrine at Bethel. Bethel is one of the two royal sanctuaries of the northern kingdom, and those are talked about in 1 Kings and in 2 Kings in the verses I give you. This is an image of, this is not, of course, the original shrine at Bethel. That, you know, is like 5,000 years old. This is an image of, I believe it's a Crusader church that was built at Bethel, but is now destroyed. But as you can see, Bethel is in the desert. It's not far from the water, but it's still far enough south that you're not in the arable land, you're in the arid land, portion of the Holy Land. But we've heard about Bethel before. Who else pitched a tent at Bethel? Abraham. Remember that? When Abraham comes to the Holy Land, he sets up his tent at Bethel early on in his story. So these ancient cultic sites, the patriarchs are visiting them. They're experiencing God there. They're anointing rocks. These are very important. And I mentioned that because what's going to happen later is all of these ancient cultic sites are going to be suppressed during the reforms, particularly the reforms of Josiah. And the argument will be made that the only true worship that can take place will take place in Jerusalem. And the argument that is made is that these local cultic sites have become polluted with the worship of all kinds of foreign gods. That's what these high places are, the hamacoms. They're not really worshiping God. They've got all this other stuff set up there. But then there's another argument to be made that's not an actual fair treatment, that Israel's religion was primarily a folk religion. For a significant portion of its existence. And the idea of the centralized worship in Jerusalem and in the temple was an odd thing that happened. And remember who made it happen. David, who wasn't even allowed to build the temple because he was too bloody, and Solomon, who was the first person to have his foreign wives start to lead him astray. And even then, God kind of like resisted the whole temple reality. And so you get this tension that exists in throughout the text about, is the temple our holy place of God, or is God actually still present in these local cultic places as well? And of course, all heaven and earth cannot contain God. And so there's a tension going on here that's reflecting a very real battle that took place in Israel and Hebrew religion, and ancient Hebrew religion, particularly around the rebuilding of the temple after the exile, about whether or not the temple was the only place worship should take place, or whether these local cultic sites were important. And you could tell, I mean, if you lived near Bethel and that's where you had always gone to worship, then now you can't do that. They want you to come to, why? Abraham and Jacob found God at Bethel, and I can't find God at Bethel. You're arguing against, a huge tradition that exists. And you even see that going on, I didn't mention it, but earlier in the text, when it said that Rebekah was barren and she went and inquired of the Lord. So what that means is she went to one of these local cultic sites to inquire of God, and either to inquire and to see if God might speak to her, appear to her in a vision, or there's often an oracle or a religious figure or a priest that was at these cultic sites who would serve as someone who would show you God's will. So when she goes to inquire of God, she's probably going, and I mean, in all likelihood, given where she is, she's probably not unlikely that she's going to Bethel. I want to show you that real quick as well. Oops, too far. So this is the journey he goes on. And so you can see, we begin in Beersheba, so they're really, really far south. So you can see Bethel is right there by Jericho, kind of in between Joppa and Jericho. He sets out and hastes from Beersheba. He camps at Bethel, which was formerly Luz, and then he continues on. So he crosses the Jordan and goes all the way up into Haran. This is the place where Abraham left Ur with his father Terah, but then they settled in Haran. They didn't go all the way to the promised land. And then when Terah died was when God spoke to Abraham and told him to make the rest of the journey. But the rest of Abraham's family didn't make that journey. They stayed in Haran. So up here in Haran, in Paddan Aram, and then after that, Jacob will get married, as we'll find out next week, and it'll come back down through the same way, and he'll stop at Peniel, which is where he will wrestle with God before crossing the Jordan again and going to Shechem, which is not far from Bethel. So just to get you a sense of kind of the geography of what we're doing and where we're going. So
I may be reading things. Well, I certainly am, because one does. Reading into it my frontier background, cowboys and squatters. But there seemed to be a tension between the farmers, the city dwellers, and the nomadic shepherds who come with the dust and go with the wind. And usually it's the nomads, the shepherds, are the more pure, closer to God, out on the land and moving, rather than these soft city folk. And I see that coming up all through history. One thing, Lot chose the better land, better for farming, closer to the city, more shops and comforts. And Abraham is the closer to God, out there wandering around with the sheep.
Yeah.
And cattle and camels.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that part of this as well is what's going on. I just stopped my screen share so we can all see each other a little more easily. And part of what's going on as well is, and I don't have time to get into it. Maybe I'll get into it a little bit later. But there's a question of what the word Hebrew means. Hebrew most likely is kind of like the word gypsy, which is not an appropriate term to use anymore. But meaning that it was likely a slur for a nomadic people, and the ancient Hebrews were very likely a nomadic tribe that did not have a place, a kind of journey from place to place. What it makes me think of, because I'm like you, Carolyn, I like those storylines too. It makes me think of the movie Open Range. You remember that movie that came out? It was about the contest. It was when the debate was between cowboys that grazed their cattle on the open country and those who blocked off land and you this is my land or my cattle will graze, and this was a huge legal and a violent debate in Texas and in the West, when the time of open grazing was starting to end, in a way that had been a part of the culture for so long. And so these open range grazed cowboys are seen as kind of freeloaders. Why don't they go ahead and get their own space and their own, it's a great movie. You should watch it this week. But I mean, there is a tension there, because there's a distrust that city folk have for these nomadic people. And you also,
there's a song in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And the cowboy and the farmer can't be friends.
No,
right? No.
Yes, they can. Territory folks should stick together.
Right. So I do think you're right, Carolyn. Some of that is you're getting a drawing back to the origins of the Hebrew people. Also, that you get a sense of the Hebrew people kind of maybe had a chip on their shoulder about the way the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Ammonites and the Edomites treated them.
Don't forget the Jebusites.
And the Jebusites. no one cares about what happened to the Jebusites, as Buechner always said, which I disagree with him on. I think people are actually, when you teach them this stuff, they do find it interesting. I think so.
Such a cool name too.
Right. I want to be a Jebusite. So yeah. So I think that's part of what's going on here too. And I mean, because a lot of, if you think of what storytelling is at its base, storytelling is the way we make meaning of who we are. And so what's going on here is this is meaning making happening. This is an ancient people taking these oral tales, which had been passed down through generations, and trying to weave them together to make sense of who they are today, and how that relates to who God is for them. And it's hard to go through. I mean, you can imagine your own family stories, probably just going back over the past, 50, 60 years. And I remember, when my grandfather died and we were telling stories before his funeral, and I told a story that several of my more conservative family members was sure never happened, because it didn't paint the family in a terribly good, some parts of the family in a very good light. And I was like, that absolutely happened. Like, I remember, and my cousin spoke. He's like, yeah, no, Grandpa told me that story too. That's actually a real story. So if it's hard enough for our families to go back 3 or 4 generations with these stories, these ancient narratives have been passed down, and then we're finally pulled together into one text. It's unsurprising that there's not only a wrestling with God, but there's a wrestling intertextually with one story and another. Any other final comments or questions? Before I timed us right this time. I'm glad that I did it right this time. Okay, so what we're going to do next week, I'll send out an email tomorrow with a link to the video and the slides from this week. What we're going to do next week is let me grab my notes. We're going to do Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And we're also going to do Jacob and the reconciliation of Esau. Those will be the 2 dominant stories we do next week. And then after that, we'll move to the story of Joseph, and we'll tell Joseph's story. And Joseph's story is I'll try to do Joseph's story in 1 week if I can. Joseph's story is what's going to clean us out of Genesis and start sending us into Exodus. So we are finally going to exit Genesis. So like I said, when I tutored for this class in my college days, I liked the fact that so much time was spent on Genesis, because it's kind of like, you need to really understand basic arithmetic and algebra before you start moving into higher forms of mathematics. And if you want to read the book of Exodus through the end of the Hebrew Bible, like, you've got to have a strong understanding of Genesis, because Genesis stands at the base of so much of what happens in later texts. So that's why I'm really camping out here. As we move from Genesis into Exodus, I'm going to start doing a little more skipping around and picking different parts of books to go through. So I'll send you some some suggested reading for you to do this week too, to prepare for our closing out of the Jacob narrative. So, all right, sound good? All right, have a good week. Oh wait, there's some things in the chat box. I totally have ignored them. Makes the Kramer household like saints. That's hilarious. Is it possible? Is it possible Isaac had a bit of dementia? That's a really good question, Karen. And I think that's a very likely thing. That, you know, because he is old and he'd always been a little feeble-minded even earlier, and so it's likely that at this point he can't see anymore. That probably he doesn't know who everyone is. Right? I think that's true.
Right, and you'd think he would know a kid's, you know, the kid's fur from hair on an arm. I mean, unless you had dementia.
Right, and the fact that even the voice that was Jacob's voice, well, I mean, like, I think I trust the voice over the goat fur.
Yeah.
And then Michelle also wanted to highlight that she loved what Jacob's promise to God at the end of chapter 28. Which is, let me find that here. Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I may come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give you 1/10 to you. And that is, so this is Jacob adopting God, but notice how he adopts him. If God takes care of me and gives me food and clothing and makes sure I'm okay and bring me back safely, I will take you on as my God. Right? So even then, he's like, Jacob, you ever meet someone that doesn't know how not to cut a deal? Like, every single conversation is a transaction. And I think that's what you do see with Jacob. Now, the question is, has he been forced to live that way, given his upbringing, the way his family has functioned? Or is that his inner fallen nature? Like, where's that coming from? I mean, we don't know the answer to that, but he has this transactional sense to life, which will play an important role in his reconciliation with Esau, as we'll see next week. So stay tuned for that. Same bat time, same bat channel. All right, I'm turning the recording off. Thank you.